وعد الله حق ولكن أكثرهم لا يعلمون.
صدق الله العظيم. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Dear brothers and sisters, assalamu alaikum and good morning. This is Keysar Trad. We have a very special program this morning. We have a very special guest. Our guest is the internationally famous actor and filmmaker Sean Christopher Ali Stone. Sean is the son of the legendary filmmaker Oliver Stone, who is famous for great movies such as Midnight Express, JFK, Scarface, and many other movies. Sean himself has starred in many movies, and he also has a show with a very famous wrestler and governor, Jesse Ventura. Sean, good morning. I can hear you now. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Salam. Good morning.
How are you today, Sean?
Very well, thank you.
Yeah, I just gave a very brief introduction. I'm not sure if you heard about your...
I did.
You did hear. Okay, great. That's excellent. Look, just to begin with, to give a further introduction or a more broader introduction to our listeners, I'd like to begin with your spiritual journey to Islam. You come from a very elite Hollywood family, and your father is Jewish. So this must be an incredible journey to Islam, and I hope you can enlighten us and enlighten our listeners about this journey to Islam.
Mm-hmm. I don't know. For many people, I suppose they're confused about these things. Religion, frankly, was never so puzzling to me. It was more of religion has always been an interesting study, and I've considered myself very much a universalist ever since I was young, because my father is actually half Jewish. His father was Jewish, his mother was Christian, and he came to his own understanding of his religion, and he's more of a Buddhist, frankly. So, he has his path of spiritual journey, and my mother has her own, and I think everyone, unless they want to be ignorant, should always study and question and learn and try to understand better their relationship to what they believe to be the Creator. So in my case, I came from a perspective that there's one Creator, one God, and so in order to say that to be a Muslim, that there is only one God, that makes absolute sense. And to say that Muhammad was a prophet, I believe absolutely in the lineage of prophets that came at the time of the birth, obviously, of Adam, but Noah and Abraham and Moses and the lineage of prophets. Muhammad is the last in that lineage, I believe. So I have no problem accepting Islam as a continuation of Judeo-Christianity. And again, I see religion as a spiritual journey that each person should investigate, question, study, explore, and think for themselves. Never just assume that because your parent is a religion or you grew up being told or indoctrinated that is necessarily your truth. You have to find it for yourself, and every day question and find your faith and reapproach your faith and have your relationship with your Creator each day.
There are a number of religions that have propped up since the revelation of the Holy Quran, or what some people would call a religion, and they have developed followers. Why did you stop at Islam? Why did you choose Islam and not any of those other religions?
Well, I would be curious which religions you're thinking of, like Scientology or...
Well, Scientology is one of them, but there was a group called the Orange People, for example. There are some others that prop up here and there, and then at some point they are discredited. But even some that are discredited widely and found to be nothing to do with religion or spirituality, they still have some followers. But you're welcome to Islam, and we're very happy that you chose Islam, because we believe Islam is salvation for anybody who chooses this way of life. But it's just a curious point.
I think it's an interesting question. Scientology, I've studied a little bit. I think there's some interesting points, and not as a religion, but just as a study of the human mind. That there are some interesting points within Scientology. Hubbard was a very brilliant man, but I think also manipulative bit, and his creating a church just to basically be a tax shelter was, I think, more of his plan.
Yeah.
The nature, I think, of again, our relationship to the universe. There are many things that we can believe in without necessarily saying that it's our faith. For me, I would say that, again, because there's one creator, one source, there's many different paths up the mountain, and it's not to say that a Hindu is wrong, or a Buddhist is wrong, or a Christian is wrong, or anything to the effect, or even that a Muslim is always right. Because each person can be wrong even within their religion, and someone can be right even if you don't agree with their religion. So for me, it's more, I like the idea of Islam as a continuation of the Judeo-Christian teaching, which I take to heart. I look to the spirituality of Islam. I really look more to the spiritual side of all religion. Frankly, to me, is more spiritual, and what the basis of it for me is submission, right? Submission to the Creator, submitting to that will, being able to let go of the ego, and trusting the Creator to guide us to where we need to be. So I think that's an important message that we should always remember, whether Muslim or not, to not become vain and egotistical in your religion. I think some people get very narcissistic or egotistical because they think, I found the right religion that makes me right, and it's not that simple. You have to actually constantly kill the ego and say, no, I have to submit to the Lord's teachings and will and basically guidance without trying to impose myself upon others, right? There is no compulsion in religion.
Indeed, the ego is, I suppose, the first fall from grace when somebody allows their ego to take control. Sean, how has your reversion to Islam affected your career? You're a famous Hollywood actor, filmmaker. Has this had an impact?
I mean, I'm not famous yet. I'm working on it. I'm certainly, I work at my craft, and I continue to work on making movies, and it's a long journey. Life will take you in many directions. So it's taken me from directing a film called Greystone Park that I don't think even got distribution in Australia, but it's a ghost story that I experienced, and after that I went to work with Jesse Ventura on conspiracy theory. That led me to doing Buzzsaw, which is an online interview program where we discuss many fascinating topics like paranormal activities and conspiracies, government conspiracies, the supernatural realm. So many amazing conversations that are now available online or on Gaia, which is a beautiful online channel that people can subscribe to. And then I also work now for RT, doing interviews for Watching the Hawks, which is a program I co-host. And, again, I've moved forward in my career doing these things that are interview-related, they're news-related, they satisfy my curiosity. I'm continuing to seek and quest. But, it doesn't mean that I'm stopping my Hollywood career. It just means that I'm moving in different directions. And then when it's the right time, my next film will be ready and it will come out.
Yeah, I think many of our listeners would have seen the interview with Jesse Ventura as he analyses what happened on September 11th. For those who haven't seen it, I would strongly recommend that you search for it on YouTube and have a look at that interview and that clip and that very interesting explanation. Sean, your book, The New World Order, A Strategy of Imperialism. Can you please give us an introduction of the book and tell us a little bit more about it?
Mm-hmm. So, in New World Order was actually my thesis when I was in college. I went to Princeton and studied history, and I had to do a senior thesis. So I was interested in this character, William Yandell Elliott, who no one probably ever heard of outside of Harvard, because that's where he was a professor. But he did mentor Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, Samuel Huntington, amongst many other elite political advisors, let's say. Right? Harvard is known for being, for grooming a lot of the political class. So I was curious to understand his trajectory, and Elliott had gone to school in England at Oxford, basically studying under this group that was called the Round Table. And the Round Table was established to perpetuate the British Empire, essentially. at the turn of the 20th century. So he was imbued with these ideas of the British turning the empire into the Commonwealth, so that people would feel more secure in in their sovereignty. So let's say Australia became free from the empire, became a Commonwealth nation. They could vote for their own rulers, right, ostensibly. But ultimately, the Commonwealth would exist to perpetuate the empire in a more benevolent form. So the idea, I think, of Eliot and his co-thinkers in the U.S., the Anglo-American establishment, right, blue blood types who were Anglophiles, was to say, let's bring America into this British Commonwealth, essentially, and turn the whole world into a massive Commonwealth that ultimately has the pretense of freedom and sovereignty, but ultimately the real rulership, the real heart of the empire, would still be in America and London, and that would be through financial controls and international law that was established out of there, and banking institutions, World Bank, things like this, to basically perpetuate a new form of empire, more benevolent empire perhaps, but still trying to control the resources of the earth and the peoples of the earth that were not of the the white Anglo tradition and lineage.
Is it really more benevolent, or is that just the appearance, that it gives a semblance of benevolence as it seems to concentrate wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and such large swaths of people all over the world become more impoverished and more needy?
Well, precisely. And that's, I think, what we've seen is this notion of globalization is wonderful. We think of globalization as, I have Chinese restaurants and Japanese restaurants, and we have immigrants now and in America from all over the world, and that's globalization. But the dark side of globalization is actually, as you say, impoverishing countries through economic means of control, basically, making sure that countries can't develop their own resources and refine their own resources. They have to, sell their resources to foreign corporations, and basically just to get enough dollars to pay their debts, because all these countries are in massive trillions of dollars, well, billions of dollars of debts, if not trillions. The U.S. alone is in trillions. But the idea is, to keep all the countries controlled by debt and have the semblance of freedom and democracy and these kind of words that they like to put out there, right? We're we're reforming Iraq for democracy and this and that. And, again, it's a process. I mean, in some cases you can say, look, there are benefits to getting rid of Saddam, and now Iraq probably is more democratic than it was before, but is it better off in the process of destruction and war and millions of people that have died as a result of these things?
Well, and the tremendous instability, the ongoing instability, and now the sectarian violence that was not there before.
Exactly.
In this big picture of global imperialism, Sean, can you give our listeners an idea about some of the behind-the-scenes machinations that led to the creation of Israel, and how that has had an effect on the Middle East?
Well, I mean, the interesting thing about the creation of Israel was that, I'm not a student of Zionism necessarily to tell you enough about Herzl, and I understand that he actually really was more of an atheist than a believer, and he was looking more for a nation state. But the issue of Cecil Rhodes, who was the British imperialist who really fomented this Anglo-American Commonwealth notion of the perpetuating the British Empire by bringing America into it. When he drafted that idea, he actually wanted to turn the Holy Land into a British colony. Right. This is when it was Ottoman. This is like 1900, 1890s. This is the Holy Land was part of the Ottoman Empire. So that was the original plan, was to make the Holy Land British. In the process of the First World War, it seems that to get basically Jewish support for the war from some of the financiers in America and England, the promise was made, as we know, in 1917, the Balfour Declaration, promising that the parts of Palestine would become a Jewish homeland, right? And so from that point, we know that the British were perpetuating this fight against the Ottoman Empire. Lawrence of Arabia, stories like this, right? They're supporting the Arabs, but they're constantly betraying the Arabs. They're saying, we'll give one clan, the access to Arabia, but then they turn it over and give that clan Jordan and Iraq, and they give the Saudis Arabia. So it's a lot of machinations going on in the process. Then yes, the British take Palestine and ultimately allow for this mass immigration of Jews, but it really becomes during the Holocaust that we know many Jews are coming in. The British ultimately abandon the country, Palestine, which is their colony at that point. And we know the history is that the UN votes, basically the U.S., all these countries, Russia, they acknowledge Israel as a country. It's born. I frankly think the problem now that we face is not the issue of how Israel was created. The bigger issue is, no, Israel exists. It's time to live with it and get beyond the pride of saying, we have a European colony in the Middle East. It's here. I don't think it's going anywhere. So it's time to simply figure out how do we live with Israel existing and living as basically, allowing that to be, how can we make the best Middle East possible? And this is a country by country issue, because I can't look at any country in the Middle East and say this is a real model of how to run a country anyway. It's not like the Saudis are doing a great job, but with the resources that they have and the wealth that they have to support the Palestinians, for example, and other, anyway, the issue is so much poverty as we see in places like Egypt or Iraq now, obviously after the war. But we have to really take it step by step and say each country has to own up to its own faults and flaws, and how can we live with the fact that Israel exists and stop this issue of, yes, we know that it was created without necessarily the will of the Middle Eastern people, but it exists. We now have to deal with it.
But the creation of Israel, to a large extent, is, I would say, part of this new world order that we're seeing. And as you talk about some of the neighbouring countries, I think many people are starting to see that the rulers of those countries aren't, or some of those countries aren't really representative of the will of the masses. But there is a massive propaganda campaign that is taking place in some of those countries and around the world to try and pacify the populace. In some cases using religion, in some cases using nationalism. But I'm interested, and I think many of the listeners are interested, about how much of this fits into the New World Order, especially the role of the Middle East in the New World Order.
Well, the Middle East is an important zone, as we've seen from the media's focus on the Middle East all these years, right? Since the creation of Israel and this eternal conflict that's resulted from the exile of Palestinians, who are in a way of being landless people at this point, stateless people. But I would say that the Middle East is, well, it's integral from the British Empire perspective, because when they were doing studies in the early 1900s, they were looking at the Russian Empire, and to this day we see Russia as the enemy of the U.S. Right? Well, it was really an enemy of the British. And the British saw Russia as a threat because it was the heartland of Eurasia, the Eurasian landmass that Britain was ever part of, right? It stretches from France and Germany through Russia to China in the east and Korea. And so in this Eurasian landmass, the British said, look, if Russia could dominate the world, because it's the heart of all this territory, and they sit on a lot of minerals and resources, they have grain and crops, but they have to basically work with the rest of Europe, Western Europe, and Asia. And if they get their act together, you could have Russia dominating the world. The British realize that. They've done their best to keep Russia at odds with Western Europe ever since World War I, with the alliance system, and then at the end of it, communism, you name it. I mean, before World War I, Russia and Germany were actually very big trade partners. I think there were like That was Germany's number one trade partner, I believe. So you keep Russia at odds with Western Europe, and the East basically, well, now it's all shifted, right? Because we've seen this more of a Russo-Chinese relationship going on. But the best way to destabilize Central Europe is the heartland of what Mackinder was talking about with the Great Game, right? With Afghanistan, where the British and Russia were always at odds because they didn't want Russia to access the Indian Ocean and to access freshwater ports of the south. So, you look at the Middle East as this sort of underbelly of Russia, and that's a major aspect of the game. But then you also, more importantly, have this clash of civilizations concept that Sam Huntington came up with Bernard Lewis. Basically, he was British intelligence, and Brzezinski was part of it, which was running Carter's administration. And the whole clash of civilizations was, well, we got to keep everyone at odds. So the Orthodox Christians can't be friends with the Catholics, right? We saw that in Yugoslavia all of a sudden, which was, one land. It gets balkanized because Orthodox have to fight Catholic, and they have to fight Muslim, and next thing you know, people that are living together are being divided based on sectarian beliefs. Well, this is orchestrated. Same with the Middle East. Let's not let people of the Ottoman Empire, who are living peacefully in the Ottoman Empire, keep getting along. Let's use sectarian division. Let's have the Saudis and their Wahhabi version of Islam, basically propagated so that that's a more radical interpretation. Let's propagate that version, and then set up Iran in contrast to propagate their version of Shiism, and now you have an inevitable conflict. And you see it obviously playing out in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, and it will continue because war, at the end of the day, I believe war breeds profit for the elite. It breeds an ability not only to sell weapons, but everything, goods, you name it. I mean, if people are in a state of war, they cannot be self-sufficient. They cannot be independent. They have to be dependent. They don't have time to grow their own crops or build their own industry, right? They have to rely upon you to supply them with these things.
As we've seen with Iraq and the purchase of the Terminator crops, which they are not accepted in America or in many countries, but they've been forced on the poor Iraqi farmers. Sean, I'd like to ask you about Trump's most recent announcement in relation to the US Capitol, that he wants to move it to Jerusalem. And as you've seen the backlash, from my perspective, the positive that came out from that is that it seemed to have awakened many people within my community, within the bigger Muslim community around the world, who had become somewhat forgetful of the plight of the Palestinian people. When we talk about Israel, I think what is really important for most people to bear in mind is that there is a native indigenous population, the Palestinian people, who are suffering from that occupation of Israel. And it's not just the Holy Land element, but there's also a huge human element that's been impacted. So many millions of Palestinians displaced living around the world, many living in refugee camps around the world, and now Trump, who I suppose had brought a lot of disrepute to what was once a great nation. He's now the president of that nation, and he has made a very inflammatory announcement that he will move the embassy, the American embassy, to Jerusalem. Just wanted to get some of your views on that, and maybe a little bit more insight about what may have motivated such a rush to make the statement and to proceed on the basis of that statement.
Right. Well, the interesting thing to me is, I don't come across, actually, I hope people probably assume that I'm like anti-Israel. I'm actually not. For me, it's more, I see Israel as a great potential, as Jerusalem itself is a great potential for the re-understanding of Judaism, Christianity, and Islam as religions of unity, of one creator, that goes through Judaism, that goes through Christianity, that goes through Islam. And so I see Jerusalem as a potential to end the division and to unify. And perhaps America will be part of that process of bringing the unity and bringing the new way of understanding and seeing the world that's not predicated in the past, because too many people see things only from the perspective of past wrongs, past sin, past pain, as opposed to saying, let go, we have to move on to say what in the present can we do to address or redress things that took place. All right, how can we help the Palestinians, but not just cry for, the fact of Israel's existence, which can no longer be changed, as I said before. How do we move forward? How do we address the fact that there's Saudis and other UAE countries are sitting on huge trillions of dollars of wealth, and yet they're happy to employ and put money to Pakistanis and other people, but not to employ the Palestinians or to give them homes and places to live. This is the thinking that we have to shift, because we've addressed it. You live in a country, Australia, where the Aboriginal people have been persecuted and driven from their land, and they have been terribly persecuted. And I live in a country, America, where the indigenous people have been terribly persecuted and driven from their land and put into positions of intolerable immiseration. So how do we make amends for that? You see, how do we redress it? For example, in the U.S., it's a long process. The natives still live in poverty, but they are Indian casinos now. They have means of making wealth, and now it's a question of them figuring out how to disperse it and use that wealth. And sometimes it's used positively, sometimes negatively. But the point is, we can't sit here and go, well, America should return it to the Indians, and we have to leave. You see, because the nature of the world is migration. Every single country on this planet has been conquered and reconquered. North Africa was conquered by Arabs. Europe was conquered by Romans, was conquered by the Vikings, was conquered, by Gauls. Every country is a bloodbath. So just because Palestine is one of the more recent ones, not the most recent, because we've seen it genocides across Africa and Asia, we have to get beyond this mentality of their sin, their wrong, they owe us. No, we have to take it upon ourselves to improve the situation, and that's all there is to it.
Well, we have to indeed improve the situation, but before you can start making amends, you have to stop the atrocities, you have to stop the oppression, and what we see is that a continued blockade of Gaza, continued Israeli troops, occupation troops shooting at innocent unarmed Palestinians in the West Bank. We've seen recently the arrest of a young girl, 16-year-old girl, who was exercising her right, her basic human right to resist an occupation soldier, part of a group of soldiers who were shooting from her property onto unarmed civilian Palestinians. Surely that has to stop before, if the Israelis are serious about looking to a future of coexistence, a future of making amends, and a future of genuine democracy where Palestinians have equal rights, then they have to stop the wrongs that they are doing at the moment. And one of the issues that has, I suppose, resonated rather well with Muslims around the world is what Israel is doing to that little girl. She's a 16-year-old girl who just turned 17 in an Israeli military prison. She's being subjected to an Israeli military court. She's not being given bail because apparently her bare hand may slap another soldier. And the horrific comments that are coming from not only some of the media in Israel, but also from some of the members of parliament about what they'd like to do to that little girl. It's just horrific. So surely it would have to start with Israel stopping what they're doing to the Palestinian people and then looking at reconciliation.
Again, I don't know that it's that. I never look at things as one side having to stop something, because I can tell you, as long as Hamas exists with the belief that Israel does not have a right to exist, you have a war. So I can't support, groups like that existing. I have to say, first and foremost, if you're defensive, I understand. If you're defending yourself, I understand. But if you actually have the ideology and promoting the ideology that a country like Israel doesn't have a right to exist, promoting anti-Semitic ideologies, you're perpetuating the war. So it's never it never is one side. It is always both sides. We have to look at how, what we can do and again, society by society. What can the Saudis do to, repatriate Palestinians and employ them? What can any of the, neighboring countries that do have wealth do to improve the situation, to move the ball forward on creating a nation state? But first and foremost saying, look, Israel has the right to exist. This is no longer a question. We're not looking to threaten Israel's existence. That's just the basic issue. I mean, as long as if you have people on your border who want to kill you, I understand, there's going to be fear. We're living with America and its perpetual war on terror, which, yeah, of course, it's nonsense. It's designed to sell security and weapons and you name it, a war machine. But there's still a kernel of truth of some, a radical group of Muslims and other ideologies that do want to destroy things and blow things up. It's not to say that I think most terror is constructed, as far as most massive terror incidents and groups are, controlled and operate and financed from the intelligence services for purposes of creating conflict. But in order to finance that, you still have to have people who want to believe it. And that's, so you can't just simply say it's one side's fault. It's always two sides that are engaging. You don't have where's Gandhi here? Gandhi never, he conquered the British, and he never picked up a weapon, right? I'm not saying it's simple as a Gandhi, but remember that it's always two sides that are involved.
There was no Gandhi in the French Resistance. There was no Gandhi in many situations where there was resistance to occupation. But once the occupation was finished, we tend to celebrate that resistance, and it seems that we as a human society tend to, more often than not, celebrate those in power, or we celebrate winners, rather than looking at the genuine human rights issues. Now, at the time of the German occupation, they would have looked at the French resistance as terrorists, as people who did not agree with Germany's presence in France. Now, the difference here with Israel, of course, is that it wasn't a nation that came to invade and occupy Palestine, although the Brits did at one point, and they were occupying it, and they opened the door for the mass migration of Jews from around the world. But it is a group of people who were not a nation, but became a nation on Palestinian land, and then the atrocities that took place afterwards. Look, like you, I do always look for hope. There is an element of optimism that requires some form of understanding from all sides, but having lived for a part of my life in Lebanon, I've seen the Israeli incursions and attacks on Lebanon, and the sorties, the aeroplanes flying over, and hounding, purportedly to bomb some of the Palestinian refugee camps. But it just seemed that at that time, that even when the Palestinians were to seek refuge in another country, they were still not safe from Israel's reach. And Israel has been known to bomb neighboring countries regularly. So,
and those were war crimes. I mean, absolutely, the invasion of Lebanon. I mean, I have Lebanese friends, so I'm very aware of the situation. I think that's the difference. Again, I look at that as incursions, absolutely aggressive incursions, are different situations. But I think my fundamental point is there has to be a shift, and I've seen it from both sides that Jews and Muslims have to stop looking at each other as rivals or some kind of danger. There's a danger to believing in some of these hadiths that talk about Jews as your enemy. We have to stop that mentality and look at Muslims, Jews, Christians have to look at each other as brothers and cousins. And if we shift that mentality, it will change a lot of things.
Interestingly, we always refer to Jews as our cousins, going back to Prophet Abraham and the lineage of Isaac and the lineage of Ismail. We grew up with that reference that they're our cousins. It's a very interesting discussion, Sean, and we could go all day. For those who know me, they know that I can go all day, but we've just taken more than half an hour of your time, and I was hoping that we might close off with a talk about the upcoming conferences that you'll be holding around Australia and New Zealand. The first one will be on the Saturday, the 24th of February in Sydney, and you'll be joined by other speakers. There'll be Professor Conchita Sarnoff and John Perkins. Professor, instead of me talking about your fellow speakers and what you'll be talking about, and I think I should also mention that during the conference there'll be opportunity for any of listeners who attend to raise questions, either based on this interview or based on your presentation at the conference. So just before we close off, maybe if you could give us a few words about the conference and a few words about your fellow speakers.
Well, my fellow speakers are fascinating, actually, probably more fascinating than I am. John Perkins, who's the author of the Confessions of an Economic Hitman, and he can elaborate extensively on these subjects. I'm sure he and I can really feed off each other, because he has personally been involved in selling these sort of, what is it? Not bonds, but basically selling loans to various countries, get them, to buy big projects that would ultimately put them into debt. And that was his personal experience on how the CIA and the intelligence apparatus of the U.S. works to basically, again, put countries into debt so that they would be stuck in forms of debt slavery. He'll be discussing, I'm sure, his life, but also his beliefs on the environment and things we can do to reconcile our approach to how we live on this earth. And Conchita Sarnoff is going to be talking about human trafficking. She's written a fascinating book called, I think it's called Trafficked, about a girl who was trafficked out of Mexico and through the sex slavery of the United States. And she exposes Jeffrey Epstein, who we know was a convicted pedophile, but she goes into some of the detail about his role. And he obviously is very good friends with people like, Prince Andrew and Bill Clinton and many others, who are now being people like Kevin Spacey, who have been outed as basically pedophiles. So it's a very interesting group of people. I'll be talking about the New World Order. I'll talk about my spiritual beliefs, my paranormal experiences. Basically, I like to open it up to the audience as much as possible as well, to get people's beliefs and thoughts and questions. I love to know what's on people's minds as much as possible. So I think it'll be a fun time.
Well, it sounds great. And for the listeners, if you would like to find more information about the conference, you can visit the website inforeset.com, and you will find all information about this conference. INFO reset, RESET, that's one word, inforeset.com. And you will get all the details about the conference for Australia and New Zealand, and you'll get a snapshot about the speakers and their topics. Sean, thank you very much for being with us this morning, for taking the time out of your busy day. And may Allah bless you and increase you in faith. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for your
كبير أرى كبرياء بلون السماء وومض النجوم